This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, the Cap in Capitalize. And today, our special guest, he doesn't really need an introduction, but because I want to treat him like every other guest that we've had, I have to give him the proper introduction. He is the amazing fullback for the Miami Dolphins, Walter Payton nominee of 2020, and what we're going to talk about today, the author of the Seven Crucibles and founder of the Ingold Family Foundation. Alec Ingold, welcome to the show.
Mr. Cap and Capitalize, how we're doing? We're doing. It's a Wednesday right now, time of recording. It's like hump day, and seeing your face on the screen, immediate good vibes. Immediate. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're one of those guys that just gets people going, gets the juices flowing. Like we're gonna be having ourselves a little day here.
Absolutely. And Miami, if you're listening for any pump up during the season, I do charge by the hour. But again, that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about Alec. We're here to talk about your book, and we've got a lot to go over. So I want to dive right on into it. And right off the bat, you mention, and I want to read this quote: "Chasing dreams without adversity is like winning a video game on the easiest setting." Now, I want to start off with a slightly fun and casual question, really ease you in here, okay? But it's very related. What video game has taught you the most about adversity in your life, whether it be your craft, financially, or personally? And I will let you default to Madden if that is your only option.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which NCAA game I was playing in my parents' basement when I was, growing up, middle school, high school. I was a big, West Virginia, Pat White, Steve Slayton. Those two in the triple option was, undefeated. And when I ended up, losing any time with those guys on offense, I got really upset. And that was, the competitive drive of, all right, we can't be getting that upset. You got to control whatever's going on. It's going to be okay. You got to learn. You got to improve. You got to grow through it. Because, man, I'd be throwing controllers, all that stuff. And it's I didn't have the money to go get another $45 controller for the Xbox. So, Pat White and Steve Slayton was my duo back in the day. And I loved playing video games growing up. So those were the growing moments, the growing pains, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, and I got to tell you, and my NCAA football story, video game story, if you will, when we first spoke, that was, I believe, that might have been right before it, but when Tavon Austin and Geno Smith were there, and yeah, they were that trio or duo, really. Now, for those of you that are listening in, you may have heard a squeaky toy in the background. That was the special guest of the show, Alec's dog. He kicked the dog out of the studio because he was being naughty, and now we are back to the show. Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, all that fun stuff. All I was going to say was that was the dream team with the triple option. Now, for you, I want to dive into you stepping on the field. So you've said this. You said it in your book. I've heard in interviews. When you step on the field, your sense of urgency and need to relentlessly carve out a role for yourself is top of mind. And you vividly remember this feeling of when you went undrafted in 2019. Not to bring up any sore thoughts, okay? But contrary to popular belief, this is going to blow your mind. I have never been a professional athlete in my life. However, I have had a very similar feeling when I started my business in 2015. Now, you fast forward today, and it's safe to say, I'm just going to assume for you, but we're both financially all right. My question to you is this: do you still feel that same financial feeling that we both felt when we started out in our respective lines of work?
The financial feeling of, I think it changes. I think your standard of living changes a little bit. You try and fight it. But you have a standard about how you treat money, how you think about money, financially speaking. It doesn't really matter what the salary is. I think I definitely compartmentalize my finances away from my professional performance, my thought processes. So the feelings towards money really hasn't changed ever since learning how to think about money through the personal finance degree that I got at the University of Wisconsin. So when you think about income changing, expenses changing, I really don't feel like my thought process or my mindset or the psychology of how I think about money really changes too much from just my normal risk tolerance, what I feel on a day-to-day basis, and how I enjoy, spending money or saving money or investing money. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I got to tell you, that is a huge gift. I'll be vulnerable with you. I personally struggle with that. I know my wife and I and our daughter are more than fine today, but I still have the PTSD, if you will, of thinking about when I started, and those first, I would say I've spoken about this a decent amount, but my first 2-3 years, in some instances, they were the best times of my life, but financially it was scary. And obviously, once you get into the NFL, you have the signing. It's a different thing because it happens like so quickly in your face. But good for you for not having that fear, because I've spoken to a lot of people where they look at it in some big names and they go, okay, am I going to be okay? And to a layman person, you're like, dude, yeah, but psychologically they're still wherever, right? Pick your poison.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of that is like you have different struggles, but you have different habits, right? So like if you're this work-life balance or the work-life piece, like in the first couple of years, you don't have the time to be spending the money. So maybe you're not thinking about it less, right? Or you're thinking about it more because you're stressed about bills and making ends meet. But now it's like you're able to focus on different problems, but they're still problems,
Yes.
and how you deal with them is always going to change. And though that dynamic, being able to embrace that and accept it and be like, it's okay. These are problems. The goal was to eat, plate is full, that type of thing. So we're just gonna keep on digging through it and battling through those problems with all the experience and knowledge that you learned from growing your company.
Sure. Well, and so when you went down with your injury in 2019, you mentioned that you were, and I want to read this directly, have been able to put things in perspective, take a step back, and think about what's important to me and reconnect with my faith at an even deeper level. Now, being that this is a financial podcast, I can only imagine how you felt in that moment, because I mean, let's face it, your career could have either been completely done or significantly diminished. And so I was just curious, financially speaking, what was going through your head when that happened?
When I tore my ACL?
Yeah, or shortly thereafter, because I'm sure once it blew out, you have other thoughts.
Yeah. Financially speaking, man, the uncertainty of where you're getting your next check is scary. And like you have all these plans, right? You have all these plans of like, oh man, I want this investment property, or we're going to do this here. We're going to have these renovations coming, because you're expecting those checks to be coming in for the foreseeable future. And then all of a sudden you have that uncertainty. You have that shake. You have that, freak moment of, man, this really isn't as stable as I thought it was. And it kind of allows you to, like the quote says, kind of understand. It teaches you more about yourself, what you're willing to go through, your perspective, your true feelings on things. And then, you have short-term goals and long-term goals, but everything changes. And you have to have that moment of reflection of like, okay, was these investment properties really the goal, or what's really the purpose behind the movements? And I think everything just became a lot more intentional for me. Every thought process with investing, with saving, with spending, like it was all intentional. There's always that extra layer of thought of, does this match my purpose? Does this match my goals? Does this match my mission? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, man, we don't need to do that.
Right. Well, and it would be a different story, and I'm sure you get this as well, because you're still a young guy. I mean, you're 26, 27. And so let's say that you were, 36 or 37, and that happened. Okay, you've got a decade under your belt of hopefully not screwing it up. So you could go, okay, I mean, yeah, my ACL is completely shot, but I'm okay. Versus, you're still early in your career, although it's been a very successful career at that. And, speaking of faith, and we connected pretty deeply over this, is we're both men of God, okay? And from previous interviews in dealings with clients, I can say with certainty, especially in pro sports, the keeping up with the Joneses can hit athletes harder than most. And so what are some of the ways that God has steered you away from doing the wrong thing financially? Or even better, what lessons have you learned after reflection from those previous mistakes that God intended for you to make?
I was just reading, I forget, like the Daily Calling. I think it was today. It was talking about, like, this is wild that you asked this question, because I was reading it and it was talking about, like, you always having this retrospect and, like, trying to fix all your problems, or trying to live a perfect life. And a forgiving and graceful God is one that's, man, just learn from it, but then move forward and act righteously and act in the best interest and learn from it and use that to glorify Him. And then all of the problems in your world, all the problems that you go through, that's just an opportunity for you to come closer to me, because you have more dependence on God, on His infinite strength and power and wisdom. So when you talk about keeping up with the Joneses, man, obviously that hits. That's human nature. And spending a little too much on, a vehicle, or spending too much on, a house that you really don't need, or trying to impress somebody on a night out on the town when really that's not, you're never going to see that money again. You get put in those situations more often as a professional athlete, but it's that moment of, like, man, that didn't really match up with, church on Sunday and being able to tithe, and to be able to gift. So financially, when you talk about that, it's crazy. And it's cool to have different moments in your life or different habits where it connects you closer to God through, daily testimonies, through readings, through prayer, whatever it is. Those daily habits definitely help me align with God and my faith. But then it's also the big things. It's the relationship. It's the overarching growth in trying to be more like Him and understanding I am not deserving of His grace or His glory, but He is a graceful God, and He bestows that on anybody that realizes that we just are not worthy of it. And I feel like that's a huge paradoxical thought, but there's a whole lot of peace to that, and it frees you up to just try your best. Because a lot of people, it's like, okay, I messed up 5 times, well, what's the 6th? It's like, no, that's not the point. Like, if you messed up 5 times, man, this is the time, this is the opportunity to do it right. And I feel like that's what's really cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And, it's interesting. We had a previous guest who played in the NBA, and obviously NBA, NFL, totally different, but financially, a lot of similarities. And you go back to, like, the early 2000s, and frankly, the NBA, first off, it was like the hood. I mean, like, it was hardcore, man. Like, you look at some of these players that were dealing with things off the court, it's like there's no way they would have gotten away with it. But financially speaking, not to go back to the video games, it was so stereotypical. Like, the rags to riches basketball game was like, what Hummer are you going to drive? It's not, oh, are you going to be financially prudent? It's just, how are you going to basically throw the money away? Versus you fast forward today, I believe it was Kevin Durant and Steph Curry were even saying that, oh, investing and planning are a topic of discussion in the locker room much more than what they heard back in the day. Now, I think they could go further, because then because let's just face it, we're all competitors. And happens is then the devil starts to dance with your brain a little, and then you get confused with, oh, I'm being very prudent, but Draymond invests in this startup and he's done a lot better, so I've got to get better and better and better. So my prayer for players is they reach that next level. Okay, not to self-promote myself here, but let's get back to your book, because one of the major themes that you preach in the Seven Crucibles, which, by the way, capitalizers, if you have not already bought the book, what are you doing? I'm very disappointed in you. You need to go on Amazon and buy it right now. In your book, you preach to embracing the challenge and change. And one example that you mentioned was forging new business relationships. And I couldn't help but ask, what have been some of the most profound difficulties, obstacles, learning hurdles, or financial lessons you have learned along the way while you have been capitalizing your finances?
I think a big thing is like overcoming stigmas around being an athlete, that you're uneducated, that you don't know what you're talking about, that you're going to get taken advantage of, that you aren't reading every sentence in a contract before signing it. And those stigmas, it's hard to get into rooms with people, and like if you're networking, for example, and you go to a nice hotel and people are 40, 50 years old, they're well down the path of their career, they're extremely successful, they have a much larger net worth than you, and you're trying to network and talk about whatever you're trying to talk about. And the conversations are always leading towards, how's the team looking next year, this, that, and the third, and you never really get to know anything about them, anything about who I truly am, what our goals are in the future. And it's like, I understand some of that is networking, some of that is putting yourself out there, some of that is embracing the challenge of new business relationships, all of those things that we talk about in the book. But it is hard to really cut to the core of what your goals and passions and pursuits are, and like what is it off the field that makes you tick, and how do you get up in the morning, how do you shake somebody's hand, and what type of character do you carry yourself with. And being able to align with somebody, sometimes it takes a lot of time. And if you're always moving from team to team, like community to community, you don't get to cross paths very often. It is tough, I think, to kind of cut through a lot of those stigmas and build meaningful relationships when you might see somebody once, twice, 3 times, and then you're out and you're on to the next job. And they kind of know that, we kind of know that, but you don't want to ever get used for a title or a stigma or something that's not exactly why you might be there, trying to build a relationship, an authentic and genuine relationship. Sometimes that it just takes a little too much time, I feel like, when you have to break through a lot of those stigmas early on.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get into that constriction of time as a professional athlete's career, because that's psychologically fascinating to me. It's interesting, though. So going back to that, it's in an abstract way for athletes that listen in. Would you say one of your biggest financial lessons, it's not necessarily a lesson, but it's proving the point that you are always reminded of the stigmas of being an athlete, and your goal is to always make sure you do not fall into that, so you can have a much more prudent mindset with your financial situation. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like when you bring that up, it's not, you lose sight of like your purpose or your goals or your mindset, and you're like, well, no, I'm just trying to avoid this mindset or falling into this trap or becoming the stereotypical spending your money this way. And it's like, well, or you could just focus on what truly matters to you and your mission and use it in a positive light too. So I definitely think it's a double-edged sword when you bring it up that way.
Sure. Well, and I also have to ask, and this wasn't part of anything I had on my mind, but I have to ask it now. It's got to be it's got to get so old for you to answer the same questions every single day. And so, not even financial related, what would you say would be some questions that you wish that these reporters and people would ask about you? Is it faith-based? Is it like your financial literacy-based, your professional-based? Like, what is something that you wish people could dig deeper into, Alec, that they're just missing?
I would love to talk about my family. I think personal finance would be great. I think that a lot of people listening, like on the YouTube clips or whatever, post-game presser, like having a little segment on like, or a quick question on like how you're using your money in a positive way would be an amazing question. I think asking questions about my freaking dogs or something that just relates us to, separate that gladiator helmet once you take it off.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get in the podium and you watch a post-game interview and guys are giving the same 15 cliche answers because that's exactly how we talk. That's exactly how we think. That's exactly how we speak when you talk about game and breaking down film and answering those same exact questions every time. But man, it's like, what if someone were to ask something in a little different lens, a little different taste, a little different perspective, juice behind different words? Like that would definitely lighten up or completely change the cadence and the rhythm and the monotony of some of these post-game interviews.
Yeah. Well, and that's fascinating too. And again, I'm not a reporter, nor do I really have any intention of being a reporter, because then you would hate me. But one thing that would be interesting is like after games, I always thought it'd be fascinating. So like in rugby, okay, I know we're going off topic a little bit. Rugby, I don't know if you ever watched a rugby match. They go tackle, beat the holy hell out of each other, and then afterwards, like the second it's done, they get together, right? High fives, dab it up, and then they go to a restaurant, and then they just talk about what they learned after the game. And I've always thought, oh my gosh, like clearly the NFL has more money than the National Rugby League, NBA, all of that. How cool would that be after games where, and I get it, it's easier said than done. Like, you wouldn't do this with two boxers that just beat the snot out of each other. But I feel like NFL, it would be so interesting, and then that would start to swerve in some of those personal questions that you find fascinating.
What restaurant do you think we'd go to? Is it like an Applebee's or is it like Delmonico's?
I ruled out Hooters because this is a family show.
Right.
But you know what? It would be, gosh. So I'm biased here.
Yeah.
I'm a carnivore. I'm a filet mignon guy. I'm not against New York steak. I'm just pro filet. I don't want to cut around the fat. I just want to inhale my food like the barbarian that I am. But it would have to be at a really nice steakhouse in whatever city that you guys are playing in. And that way it's elevated the brand because it's a much more sophisticated thing. You're stepping outside of the, I'm a dumb jock. It's like, no, I'm a sophisticated scholar on the field.
That scarfs down fillets.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I remember, really quick side note, when Drew Bledsoe was playing for the Cowboys, I believe, we used to go to the Metropolitan Grill in Seattle fairly regularly. It's a great steakhouse. And I remember they were in town to play the Seahawks, and, you see some of the linemen, and some of these guys are just... I don't know why I'm telling you this. They're massive. And I remember this lineman ordered for an appetizer, like teriyaki tidbits, and then there was something else. And then for his main, the main course was a 40-ounce lobster. And this dude wolfed it. I mean, that plate was clean. I think he ate the tail. And I don't know how he got through the game the next day. But it was just like, holy cow. But I could see one of those nice steakhouses, you set it up in a private event room, you have someone that controls the dialect a little bit, and it's just an open conversation. And of course that will spur into, like, you'll go, I ran up this B gap because I thought it was most optimal. And by the way, you could parallel that to what I did financially with this investment property. Like, it's very easy.
100%. I think a lot of guys pregame will go to Ruth Chris just because that's a chain and well known, right? So like you can get one in Jersey City or down in LA, like coast to coast. You can literally get a Ruth's Chris anywhere, and that's where a lot of guys talk within the team. So that's where you get some of those financial discussions for sure. Especially when you got guys that are showing up in brand new chains and you're like, how much that run you? You kind of give them, flame them up a little bit. Sometimes it's, we're talking about Airbnbs and short-term rentals versus long-term rentals. So the conversations definitely flow at steakhouses. So I definitely like where your head's at.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pro state.
Yeah.
So now, I actually want to go back to your Wisconsin days a little bit. I know I'm not going to bring up when our Ducks beat you 49-42 in the Rose Bowl. That will be for another time. But I was more intrigued about Oracle, okay, and your job offer and how you went to the student job fair and you scouted out financial jobs as a possible plan B, which thankfully didn't work out because you're balling out in the NFL, okay? Now, interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, but the GOAT, Tom Brady, actually applied to be a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch just in case it didn't work out. Now, I think he's doing fine. Okay, I can't confirm that. I think he's doing fine. But my question to you is this. What was the initial driving force behind the financial major? Was your household surrounded by financial literacy? Were you just naturally drawn to it? Enlighten me a little bit.
Honestly, I thought it was just a life skill that I needed to learn more about. Like, I didn't get into the business school. Grades, that psychology class as a prereq just absolutely destroyed me right before, which is wild because now I love the topic and I can't think or read or talk about it enough. But anyways, didn't get into the business school, and personal finance just seemed like it was a life skill that I felt like I needed. I felt like understanding how money works, how it operates, how you play the game, I wanted to learn more about it. And the entire major is about helping people determine their retirement gap from, whenever you first meet them at 35 until 65 or whatever it is, right? And but the same principles apply to 26-year-old Alec that's trying to figure out life right now. And to be able to go through that major, it was one of the biggest blessings ever because you get a little bit of public speaking, you get a little bit of networking, you get a little bit of business. I got an entrepreneurship certificate, so you kind of get that whole process of how to market yourself or entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship principles, which I love as well. So I think it was something I stumbled on, but I definitely had some awareness about early on, like I'll probably need this regardless of what I'm trying to do, and just having a fundamental understanding of how money moves was going to be important.
Yeah, well, there's so many questions I had in that one segment. So intrapreneurship is something that I think is highly... I'm going to take it a step further. It's not highly underrated. It's just super brushed under the rug, which is so dumb to me because I feel like some of the most successful people are entrepreneurs. Like, you need them in your life. I'm an entrepreneur. The company I was at before, I spun off, created Capitalize Your Finances, didn't put anyone, didn't burn anyone. Like, we did it prudently. Entrepreneurship is extremely valuable. The entrepreneurship certificate, how did you get that? Was it like you had to start a business? Was it a paper? Like, what was the deal?
So everyone did start an LLC, which was cool. I'm actually using that LLC now, just with the speaking, the book, all that stuff. But it was a really cool course schedule of being able to get a little bit of marketing, a little bit of consumer behavior, a little bit of actual entrepreneurship and the work that goes into it. And I fell in love with the work ethic of it. Like, man, you really have to work your tail off. If you're starting your own business, it's not really glamorous, man. And it's like you see some people doing really well at 55, 60, it can go country club because they have the small business that's successful. But man, they work for absolute pennies for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades to be able to get to that point. And I'm all about delayed gratification. I'm all about working hard, all of those principles. So I vibed with that a lot. I really enjoyed the professors, the teachers, everybody that was involved in that certificate. Those are some of my favorite classes going at Madison.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. Well, and so I don't want to give too much away in your book here, but you mentioned a young man, or at this point, he could have been a middle-aged man in high school, Andy Kasich. Okay? Kasich. It was Kasich or Kashik. I looked him up online. I shot my shot, and I missed it, but it's neither here nor there. Okay? With a last name like Paniotu, I mean, at least I tried.
Yeah.
So for him, financially speaking, this is a teaser for people that need to go and read the book. Who was your Kasich equivalent financially, and what does your financial Kasich team look like today?
That's a good question. So I put together a pretty good team of guys right now that I had to work through to be able to get to this point where we're completely aligned on vision, on mission of money, of long-term, short-term goals, and how that's all aligned. And those guys in that team that you surround yourself with, like being able to understand the power, to empower yourself to make decisions on how things are moving and to be able to communicate that to the rest of your team, extremely important. And I feel like being able to have the right team of CPAs and wealth management, business partners, it's all super important to have them a little bit separated, but at the same time very connected at the hip with communication, being able to understand that network. I don't know if I've had a financial Kasich moment or person, because I think that there are people that show you the way, and I guess that would be a good. So there's this guy named Scott Weddage that I really look up to, part of the team, and he's one of those guys that's not going to hold your hand through anything, but he's going to be more than willing to open the door to communicate, to help you if you ask for it. And I feel like that's a principle that can really translate well when you have guys like that on your team that they've figured it out, they've learned the lessons, they've taken their lumps, whatever it takes, and they learn how to get in and embrace it and understand the principles, the work ethic, the way that you need to achieve sustainable practices for the long term. And for somebody like that to open his doors to you, to be able to advise you, to be able to give you advice and be there as a friend, as a mentor, but also make you work for it and make you understand that you got to go through those steps. It's not going to be handed out to you. I feel like that's extremely important in understanding like the very root of what it takes to have sustainable living and sustainable practices that are going to do you well in the long run.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotu, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
No, one of my favorite quotes I learned from someone I look up to a lot, and this was a long time ago, was, "I can't want this more than you." And the whole premise behind that was when I was figuring out business, and you meet with these people, and I want it so bad for anyone that comes in my office or comes on my podcast or buys my book, whatever it is. And it's really hard to look someone in the eye and go, look, I can't want this more than you. And you've got to understand how big of a commitment that is that just came out of my mouth. Because I want it bad for you, man. Like really, really bad. So are you that in and then some or not? Because if not, I cannot do it. Like my heart will literally break. So I'm glad you have people like that. And, we spoke about this a couple minutes ago. But your concept of the grind set, it re-sparked a second question, or a second parter, if you will, in the keeping up with the Joneses. So there's a moment in the book where it kind of hits you in the mouth, or in the ACL, pun intended, that nobody cares about your setbacks, okay? And you have to channel your inner focus, your inner purpose. I add this one, your inner prudence, and to what is going on in your life. Now, one of my favorite investors, Charlie Munger, it's kind of an indirect quote, but it relates. Once you get something that works fine in your life, the idea of caring terribly that somebody else is making money faster strikes me as utterly insane. Now, unfortunately, flashy positions in the league make more on average than the grunty ones. But fortunately, this leads to the Class B equivalent of players, as you're well aware, and that leads to longer-term success in finances or really anything due to forced prudency to make up for not earning as much, which again, in this case, is a gift. So you're doing just fine. But my question is this: being in the highly competitive environment at all times, financially included, dive in a little bit more. What are some of the techniques that you use to isolate your financial situation from other players so you can just be you?
I mean, I never check anyone's pockets. I think that's a statement that's well respected around the league. Like, whether you're on a rookie deal, whether you're on your third contract, second contract, $100 million deal, league minimum, there's some sort of respect to how you show up every single day and the type of man you are. And that's how I'm going to judge your character. That's how I'm going to judge the type of person you are, because that's who I'm going to play with. And that's the person that you have to be accountable for and that you have to trust. And flip that on its head, like, that's the type of person I'm going to be. That's the type of person I'm going to make sure that I have intentional steps. I don't really think that I'm never going to question anybody checking what contract you have, even though it's public information now. I think it's something where you want to shake somebody's hand and let them know that you're there for them, and that accountability factor, all of that, right? So if you're trying to check other people's pockets or put a higher respect to somebody because of what somebody else is willing to pay them or what they're considered worth, I think that's a dangerous game to play, because like you said, keeping up with the Joneses, the second thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, the questions all of that hesitancy starts to come up. All those questions start to come up. There's all this chatter in your head that doesn't belong there. And if you can really cut through that, acknowledge that chatter isn't worth it. It's not helping you do your job. It's not helping you be the best version of yourself for performance, for the team, for the locker room. Like, it's not worth it. And at the end of the day, if you're worried about being the best version of yourself, financially you will get rewarded at some point. And it might not be with the contract. It might be post-career. It might be, whether it's that locker room or a different locker room, you're working on your net worth internally, intrinsically. And that is going to show value eventually. And so many people get lost in this game of like, I want it now, I need it now. And that patience is just not a virtue anymore. And to be able to willingly embrace and accept the fact that you are going to walk this road and this journey for the long haul. You're going to expand your time horizon. So it doesn't matter if you're in a contract year, if your career is going to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. As a human being, for as long as you're going to be on earth, you're going to keep improving. You're going to keep showing up. You're going to keep trying to find ways to raise your value, your intrinsic value, the type of character you have. The value is going to show up in one way or another, whether that's with your family, whether it's financially, whether that's relationships. It's going to show its fruits of its labor. So having that trust, that blind faith, I think is extremely, extremely important, because otherwise you're going to get lost in the sauce really quick.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. The first thought that came to my mind was the reward that you keep mentioning. It actually has nothing to do with finance. And I think a lot of people are very blinded by that. And again, not knocking rookies that just get into the league and you go from nothing in many cases to literally a boatload of cash. That dwindles pretty quickly. I also think it's interesting. You brought up a point, because I agree. Like, you don't ask someone like, so how much are you worth? I mean, you just don't. Which I'll tell you, just being vulnerable, that was really tough for me when I first started in the business, because that's literally my job. And it took me probably 4 years to like really embrace it, going, okay, like, look, when people come in, I got to do this, right? But even then, it's just odd. What I find more valuable is how people remove the numbers. How did you get to where you're at? And if they want to share, then that's up to them. I don't know if you've come across this in the league. I've talked to enough people where I get a pretty nice blend of it. Some people don't say anything, and others are very open, especially in the investing community. There's a book that I'll send you. It's called Richer, Wiser, Happier by William Green. He was on our show a couple months back. And one of the people he interviewed was arguably my favorite investor of all time, Monish Pabrai. And he basically asked him, what are you worth, without asking it directly. And the dude just texted him, like, 256.5 million. Just nothing. Like just nothing. And it's not like a flex or anything. I'm just going, whoa, like super casual about that. So it's fascinating to see the dynamics. And I've seen in the league a lot of players, you're right, they don't ask, they're very respectful of others, because let's face it, when you were on the Raiders, and you know this, Carr was getting paid more than most people, maybe in some cases more than the entire line combined. You don't need to ask him. But what could be valuable, because I respect him a lot, is, okay, what are you doing to make sure that you're not going backwards with that? Like, that's where it gets to be really intriguing and valuable. This is going to be more of a personal question instead of financial. So, the leadership crucible. This one hit me pretty deep in a great way. And, one of the traits that you focus on continuing to master is becoming addicted to the journey, not the destination. In a very similar sense, I actually wrote about this in my book. If you fall in love with the process, you learn to live with the proceeds. Right? Different flavor, but we're still eating ice cream here. So it's much easier said than done. And so for you, when did you fully embrace and fully understand that focus?
I think it came down to going undrafted and having that realization of, like, what was the actual goal. And you talk about, like, being a rookie and having this boatload of cash. My signing bonus was $10,000, and I was going to use half of that to freaking get out there. You know what I'm saying? And the other half went to California. Yeah. So the aspect of, like, falling in love with the journey, I've definitely realized, like, through the pre-draft process, through everything that was going on, like, I sacrificed a lot, man. Like, I've tried my hardest, put everything in it, all the chips were on the table, and to fall short, it was like you felt like betrayed, and like you have all these doubts, and you wonder if you're doing things the right way. And eventually you just got to get out of your own head, and you just got to do the work. And you got to say, like, whatever I was doing just wasn't good enough. And that process and that mindset, if you carry it with you long enough, the results, like you're saying, the proceeds, like it's irrelevant. Like it's there, and that's great, but that's not why you do it. And I feel like I definitely go in ruts. I go in, great headspaces. I call it being in the pocket. Like, I'm a quarterback, like, just sitting there in the pocket. Like, I'm great. I'm in the journey. I'm in the process. I'd say I'm in the pocket right now. Like, the schedule I have, the routine I have, the work that we're doing, it's a lot, but I freaking love it. And I'm focused on these results, not the result. I'm focused on the process, right? And you get to a point where sometimes whispers happen, intrusive thoughts happen. You start listening to all of these external validations that you're searching for. For me, the first time going undrafted, the external validation was GMs, head coaches saying that you're valuable enough for a draft pick. Other people might be wanting to be a Forbes 40 under 40 person and wanting that external validation. Some people might be chasing whatever external validation they're looking for. And that gets tiring, that gets exhausting, that gets mentally draining, that pulls so much out of you that you aren't able to give it to the rest of the world that you have built, that you need, that people are counting on you, the relationships, the network. So I definitely think being centered, being in the pocket, that's my visual representation of, like, that's where you need to be. That's your happy place, a little Happy Gilmore action. Like, that's where you fall in love with it. That's where you fall in love with the journey. And the first time, to get back to your question, that I really encapsulated that, I understood that, was going undrafted and then having to go find a job. And I fight with that every day. Like, some days are great and some days aren't the best, but like, you find different ways and tricks to get yourself back to that pocket, to get back to center, to get back to neutral, to be able to say, this is the process, this is what I need to hold myself to, this is the discipline, these are the standards that I need to keep in order to stay successful.
That is, first off, it's awesome, and second off, it is extremely fascinating. I will tell you, and also, I don't know if, yeah, I'm going to use this word. Empowering is one of the words I was thinking of too. I mean, I can tell you, I was not expecting that to come out of your mouth at all. One thing that I've thought about, and I'm not a regret guy, and I know you're not either. However, and it can get confused with being regretful, and it's not. Sometimes I look back. One of the guests we just had on right before you, actually, Comic Dowell, we talked about how today is always the biggest challenge that we have. But then you look back and go, oh, that was so easy, right? And so then my mental model is I think back, fast forward to today and go, okay, someday I'm going to think this is easy, so now I just need to enjoy it. Now, again, there's the financial aspect of it, and so the fact that you had that, going undrafted, trying to find a job, that's nothing short of remarkable, man. I mean, you have a lot to hold your head up on, because I can guarantee you nobody else would fall in love with the process after being undrafted and, living in California with now $5,000 because half of it went to the flight. Now, you and you also grew up in an amazing family, and we spoke about that too, and that's huge. And this is another faith question. So it was really interesting because coincidentally, one of my best friends and I started Bible study this year. And I grew up in Presbyterian, but I never really studied the Word. And so one of our first verses we were studying was Hebrews, and 12:11 was in your book. And for those of you that have not memorized it, I'll read it for you. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Now, being an NFL athlete, or any athlete for that matter, but especially NFL, I find this Bible verse slightly perplexing because, let's face it, regardless of your health or lack thereof, an athlete's career is going to be shorter than an quote-unquote average career. And so it could be financial or general. How do you balance the word of Hebrews 12:11 with at the same time knowing that, again, unlike most careers, time is exponentially more precious and concentrated, which results in you not necessarily having as much time to compound that success?
I think a big thing is actively pursuing pain and discipline. Actively pursuing the process of disciplining yourself, mastering your mindset, being able to master your body so that when you want to quit, when it's hard, when it's 95 degrees, 95% humidity out on a field, you are willing to sacrifice in that moment for the good of the team, for the good of faith, for the good of God, for the good of purpose, passion, power, what all things holy and good in this world. You're able to sacrifice and find some sort of purpose and more within inside yourself because you have prepared that way. You've prepared for that moment. And when those moments are fleeting, when you only have 18 opportunities to do what you love to do, opportunities to do what you love to do over a whole year, it's really this off season of preparing, disciplining yourself, making sure that you are keeping these habits intact where, yeah, it's not a big deal. May 10th, you can do whatever the heck you want to do on a Wednesday, get away with going through the motions on a Thursday. But in some form or facet, some way, that is going to show itself in October, November, December, January, February, when the chips are on the table. So when you talk about Hebrews in that scripture, in that reading, submitting yourself to the discipline and making sure that you are doing what is right because you know what's right, and that little voice inside your head is telling you you know what's right, if you're going to do that work, it will show up somewhere, some way. And that's the faith behind it. That's the trust behind it. That's it'll happen when it happens behind it. But you have the power to do what you are meant to do, what you are supposed to do, what you are pushing yourself to do, what is pulled you to do right here and right now, and being where your feet are at.
And not to PTSD you even further regarding the ACL, but did you have any moments that popped into your head once it was torn going, oh my gosh, maybe not May 10th, but like, man, 6 months ago, I shouldn't have, I don't know, gone out and partied too hard with my fiance, soon to be wife, which, side note, congratulations in advance. Okay. She's very lovely. And maybe, hey, I had too many wings at my parents' house or something. I should have tightened up the diet a little bit because that extra weight blew out my kneecap, right? Like, did you have any of those moments?
Yeah, I think you do. And that's human nature. You have intrusive thoughts. And one thing I talk about or think about is you have to control your thought after the thought, right? So acknowledging that you're going to have those intrusive thoughts of, man, I stayed out too late last night, or I didn't do this last week, or my practice was bad the week before, or man, I didn't roll out my neck. Like, you can't be perfect. Nobody's perfect. You got to have some sort of self-compassion about it. And at the same time, you have to accept things for what they are and the circumstances for what they are, to be able to move forward and make the best out of it. So in order to like really kind of avoid the rabbit hole of just drilling yourself for every little minute mistake that you made leading up to that ACL, it's so much easier to look and point at all the mistakes you've ever made in the past. And it's so hard to look at all of the things you've done right to even get yourself in that point to be on Sunday Night Football as a team captain covering a punt, right? Like, it's so much easier to look at all of those negatives. So there is some self-accountability. There is some networking to it. Your trusted network, the fiance, family members, to be able to be there for you, to support you and uplift you, give you tough love when you need it. Like, that's, it's a balance, but the balance is important, and you can't let those intrusive thoughts win. You have to stay focused on forward and just learn from the past. So, financially, I think that's a big thing, is like taking your lumps. And what's the best time to stop digging a hole is like right now, or like 20 years ago, but like the second best time is right now, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, quit digging. And it's a lot harder to do than just to say it. But I think that is an extremely important concept to learn fast. Because if you're willing to just keep digging yourself a hole, other people are going to pass you up. And that's just the reality of the situation. That's the reality of the circumstance. That's the reality of the NFL.
Yeah. Well, and on the flipping that on its head, because obviously that's a more negative mindset thought, even though we're both very positive, Paul. For you, financially, have you ever had one of those moments where you really wanted it? Like, you really wanted it. I don't need to know if it's a specific investment or whatever the case is, or an opportunity, and you don't get it, and you're just bummed. Maybe you're just pissed. I don't know. You are thoroughly upset. And then maybe a year or 2 or 3 go by, and then whatever happens, it falls apart. The person ended up being an absolute schmuck, and you're like, holy crap, God had his hand on me, and I had no clue. Like, how often has that happened to you?
A million times. Like, I'm a very goal-oriented person, and I put down a lot of insane goals, and I don't really get a whole lot of them, to be honest. Like, but I feel like the chase, the pursuit, the process towards holding yourself to the standard, to give yourself a chance to have a chance to succeed in that opportunity, in that goal, in that accolade, whatever it is, like, man, you get bummed. And it's like, you look back, you reflect, you're like, man, I could have done this, that, and this better. But then at the same time, you take a step back, or time passes by and you look at it through an unbiased lens, and you really be like, okay, was it that specific goal, or is the type of person that you've become and the real character that you put yourself through, the discipline that you've submitted yourself to, really been what reward was kind of residual that you didn't even realize, and that could be 10 times more impactful and powerful long term than that original thought. So that happens every year, every day, every week, every month. I hardly succeed in the goals that I write down, that I pursue, and it is what it is. But you kind of learn how to fail, how to improve, how to adjust, how to continually grow through the process, I guess.
Sure. Does the goal setting, I'm super intrigued on that. Does that bother you that you don't hit a lot of those goals? And I'm speaking from, so I'm a New Year's resolution guy. My followers know that about me. And it's not because I'm like, oh my gosh, new year, new me. It's because, okay, I've ingrained these processes into who I am. And I feel like a year's a long enough time to make that happen. So then I grade myself, I assess, I move on. And of course, you capitalize. Mm. And for me, the first couple of years, I mean, looking back on my business goals was just, I'm laughing at my younger self because I'm like, gosh, like what an idiot. But like you did it. And then I caught myself really just not down, but like, gosh, I'm not hitting anything. And so now I've contorted my mindset to, hit the goals, but then there's the balance of, oh, I'm going to do it. This is going to push me, but I can also get it prudently. And whether that's with, my Crohn's disease and having that flare up or having a baby now and having my mind shift. I'm curious because for you being so hyper competitive and successful in that, I feel like that would almost be a deterrent to you if you're like, dude, like, like if you're, because it's Alexa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If she's like, oh my gosh, like, how was your day? I'm like, sucked. Like, I didn't get anything achieved again, right? And she's like, you've kind of said that for 5 years. Like, maybe you should, like, think about it a little differently. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just shocked that doesn't just kill you inside.
Yeah, I think when you're in the pocket, like we were talking about earlier, it's great.
Yeah.
And it's something that the type of person you're being to chase those goals is way more important than the goal. But you have days where it's like, man, I'm working my tail off and nothing's happening, nothing's falling into place. You feel bad, you're tough, you're pissed, your mind's elsewhere, you're not where your feet are at, and it's that definitely weighs on you a little bit. But like I said earlier, you've accepting and embracing, like it's easier to self-correct yourself when you acknowledge it, when you feel it yourself, when you feel these things coming on. And I feel like that's so important in this entire chase is like, what's the purpose of the goal? So like, I'll write down goals because I really think that is my full potential. And if I really do everything right and everything falls into place, that can happen. I do believe that. But the intention of writing the goal, I know in my heart of hearts is I'm really just holding myself to a standard and a process to be able to somewhat get there because I'm going to get the best out of myself that way. So I think if you have that intention at the very beginning with the end in mind, yes, you're hyper competitive. Yes, there's that killer instinct at the end is like you want to capitalize, you want to finish, you want to be able to execute at the very end. But you also know that you're doing this like all the way at the beginning of the podcast. We're doing this on the highest difficulty on Madden, right? Like you understand, you have that awareness, you have the circumstantial awareness to be like, this is really, really hard. This is if everything goes perfectly. And if it doesn't, we landed somewhere so much closer than if we didn't even try at the beginning. And like that process is easier to digest, to move forward with, to adjust with, the more you do it. So I feel like that's where I'm kind of at right now in the pocket.
Yeah, we call that in financial terms the margin of safety. Now, for you, I have to ask, what are some of the goals, if you can share, that you have, that you're willing to share, and then you can put it on the mic and go, okay, now I got to put my money where my mouth is. What are some of these Alec goals?
Personally, professionally, I want to win a Super Bowl. And like that's a very cliche thing to do. And like that's a cliche, it's a safe, like, you want to. No, like I actually do. Like I would feel like in my heart, like I feel like I can be a role player, and I'm not a quarterback. I'm not somebody to touch the ball every single time. to be able to impact the game. Sometimes I can have great games and the team will still lose. But I do think that the overarching impact you can have throughout a season, I really do think that that's something that I want to accomplish before I retire. That's about the pinnacle of a professional goal as you can have. Personally, there's a lot of business ideas that I really want to do. My little mantra is inspire belief. I want to be able to create a company one day that helps youth athletes, high school athletes, college athletes connect to professional athletes in this mindset training, in the growth mindset, in the ability to take the life lessons of athletics and be able to really utilize them, understand the life lesson that athletics teach you in such a extrapolated experience and in such a unique circumstance. I want to be able to translate those life lessons to youth athletes so that they don't get caught up in the travel baseball of I'm going to play a million tournaments, I'm going to get all these rings, I'm going to chase all these wins right now, right? Like I'm trying to kind of reverse that aspect of what has kind of transpired since I've gotten in the league. That's something that I think I could have an impact in, that my family could have an impact in, that would be really, really meaningful. And what's the number on a number of kids? Like friggin' all of them. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the amount of younger athletes that are growing up, I hope that everyone has a coach in their life that is able to say like, or give some proper perspective to what athletics are truly trying to teach us.
Yeah. And by the way, I'd be a little concerned if your goal wasn't to win a Super Bowl. So like it is not cliche at all. Like in my mind I'm going, if he doesn't say this, like he's probably going to be cut here soon. Like let's just call it like it is. So I'm really glad you said that. But personally, I think that's awesome, and there's so many different avenues you could go down that rabbit hole with. Do you think that will be something that you want to focus on more while you're in the league because you're in it, or is that going to be something once you have retired and you're able to step back and work on yourself because you're not in yourself? Does that make sense? Like have you thought about the timeline?
I think there needs to be a balance, right? Because the opportunity of a lifetime only exists for the lifetime of the opportunity. So the lifetime of the opportunity of being in the NFL, to have that platform, that has an expiration date. We're going to make sure we're working hard. We're doing everything we can to keep that main thing the main thing, to inspire as much belief as possible while you're here, while you're with the teammates, while you're in the league, while you're in the locker room. You can never let any sort of pursuit, passion, hobby distract from that main goal. But in the free time, if you're passionate and that's the thing you do, instead of playing video games, instead of going out and it's like, oh, I want to build a company, I think that balance can really get started now. It's going to be interesting once, hopefully 5-10 years from now, when I have to hang them up, how accelerated that process is going to be because of all the work that you put in while you're still in the league.
Yeah. One thing that hit me actually this past weekend, it was the Berkshire Hathaway conference as of this recording, and Charlie Munger, who he very well could be dead by the time we're done recording this because he's almost 100 years old, and his best piece of advice that he said is in his entire life was, I wish I wrote my obituary earlier and reverse engineered it. And so from a business standpoint and a personal standpoint, now I have not done that because I don't want my wife and my daughter to listen to this and start just crying, right? I'm not on suicide watch or any of that. But on a serious note, it had a profound impact on me. So I challenge you, maybe not around the time you're getting married, maybe like wait a couple months after that, let the honeymoon phase die out a little bit, and then I would seriously write that professional or business obituary, and I think it's going to have a profound effect on your post NFL success. Now, the last question for this episode, because I want to be respectful of your time. You are the man of the people. You are in high demand. And the fact that you chose to do this show as opposed to anything else in the world, we're very thankful for it. So I wanted to throw you just a humdinger of a last question. And you've accumulated all of this knowledge in the NFL. And actually, in a very short period of time, if you think about it. And regardless if it's spiritually, financially, the world of business, you name it. My question is this. If Alec the Dolphin could go back in time to instruct Alec the undrafted, soon-to-be Raider, what would be the greatest pieces of advice you would give your younger self in regards to these big three topics?
I'd have a long conversation with Alec undrafted first off. It would be a very, very long... There was a pause there because I had to kind of think about what I'd really wanted, like the super takeaway moment thing.
Yeah.
What you could draw a line through, pull the thread all the way through, everything that you would want to say in a sentence is be where your feet are at. Because my mind works a million miles an hour. I'm worried about every single install and understanding, what I need to prepare for the practice field, and then how the practice field, what did the film look like, and then how's the film going to translate to the actual games, and who's doing this, and how can I watch here? And it's like, breathe. Be where your feet are. Dominate your moment. Be at your best when your best is required right here and right now. That would be it. Mic drop.
That is awesome. When I can tell you from the first time we met, I don't know if you remember this, you were going a million miles an hour. I don't know about literally, but you did FaceTime me while driving. So that is the definition of high risk, high reward. I won't tell anyone that you did.
No, yeah, that's between you, me, and all the capitalizers.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now for you, because we always want our capitalizers to support our listeners in every single sense of the word. So where can capitalizers go to best support you?
I think AlecIngold.com is a great place to start. And if anyone else is still listening towards all the way at the end of this thing, Instagram is another good spot. But I do love my little weekly newsletters that you can get. You can subscribe to through that website. And that's just a cool way to get inside of my weekly routine, what's going on, in kind of that growth mindset as we continue to progress towards eventually a Super Bowl.
Yes, absolutely. And not to mention, you've also got a podcast out now, which is fantastic.
I do.
And I've absolutely loved it. And Alec, we are going to have you up to the Capitalize HQ when the studio's built out. You're going to have to sign the Capitalize wall. But until then, I thank you for tuning in. And for those of you that have tuned in through this entire lovely episode with the legendary Alec Ingold, I thank you dearly. Now, for you veterans out there, you know the drill, but for you newbies listening in for the first time, first off, welcome to the show. Second off, if you have any questions or comments about Alec or today's episode in general, please, kindly, either shoot us an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com, or you can give me a call at 253-214-3050, and I'd be more than happy to answer anything on your lovely little minds. And if you're listening in and you're going, hey, I would love to be a guest on Capitalize Your Finances, or I'd love to have the Cap and Capitalize on my show as well, great. Head on over to Capitalize Podcast, hit us up, DM us very quickly. We look at it every single day. We will get back to you soon as humanly possible. As always, I'm your host, Chris Paniotu, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Alec Ingold and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.